theyeshiva.net.
Pesachim Kuf Tesvav Amud Aleph, the last line. Amar of Papa. Amar Rebbe Lazar, actually. Amar Rebbe Lazar, yeah. Let's just see. Amar Rebbe Lazar, Amar Rebbe Shir. Rebbe Lazar said in the name of Rebbe Shir, Kol shetibule b'mashke tzarech netilas yadayim. A big halacha, any food that you dip into a liquid. In other words, the way you eat this food is by dipping it into a liquid. That's the normal way of eating it. Tzarech netilas yadayim. You have to wash your hands before you eat this food, which you're going to dip into the liquid. Of course, if you're eating the food when you're not dipping it into the liquid, you don't have to wash your hands. We're talking about when you're eating a meichel that you dip into liquid. So you have to wash your hands before you eat this meichel. And the reason is, as explained, because if you don't wash your hands, when you touch this liquid, what's going to happen? The liquid, the beverage, is going to become tameh from your hands, because the status quo of hands is tumah. They're called shniyos l'tumah. They have a certain level, a weak level, but a certain level of tumah. Only the hands, not the rest of the body, because this is not the regular classic biblical tumah, which always affects the entire body. This is a unique rabbinic tumah that's focused on one thing. They wanted a Jew to eat with clean hands. That was the focus, and therefore there was no need to spread the tumah to other parts of the body. It's not that spiritual impurity that we speak about when we say somebody touches a corpse or somebody touches another source of tumah. It's a different genre of tumah, which relates exclusively to the hands and is eliminated when I pour the water on top of my hands, which we call netilas yadayim. And hence now when I will touch the beverage, the liquid, when I dip the food into the mashka will not become tameh, and therefore if it will not become tameh, it will not pass the tumah on back onto the food which I'm eating, and therefore I will not be eating non-pure food, which, as Tosfos says, would be a problem. Certainly in the days of old, it was either considered prohibited or at least considered undesirable, or according to the second interpretation, has nothing to do with the food becoming impure, but it's the idea that the Chachamim instituted that before you touch a liquid, a beverage, by dipping food into it, because that's how you'll touch a beverage, because when you're drinking a beverage, you're not touching it, you're drinking it. But in this case, you're dipping the food, just like they said we have to wash our hands before we touch bread, because they were afraid of truma becoming tameh. They also said we have to wash our hands before we touch any type of liquid, because they were so afraid of truma becoming tameh, because as we explained, all liquid becomes tameh when I touch it with my hands if I didn't wash my hands. And that tumah is a very high level of tumah. It's called a rishon l'tumah, and anything that touches that liquid, any food or any drink, will become tameh automatically. A second generation sheni l'tumah as a result of that margin. That's why they were so strict when it came to liquid, far more than when it comes to food. Food I only have to wash when I eat bread. Liquid, I have to wash. Any liquid that I am dipping into my food into, I have to wash. And that says the halacha Rebbe Lazar taught us in the name of Rabbi Shir. Okay, this is the summation. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa said, Shema Mina. From this halacha of Rabbi Shir, we could learn that Hai Chasa, this lettuce, tzarich l'shakue b'charoises, you have to dip it, you have to submerge it in the charoises completely. L'shake means don't just dip it, submerge it, put it in all the way. Mishum kappa, because of kappa. What is kappa? So Rashi and the Rashbam say kappa is the poisonous element that existed in the maror, in the sap of the chazeres. Rashi says there is an eris. There is sometimes something poisonous. Rashi says kederech haptzalim. It also happens sometimes in onions. And when they dipped it in, they submerged it in the charoises. According to Rashi, the sweetness of the charoises neutralized the poisonous impact, and therefore it's not dangerous anymore. That's how Rashi learns it. That's the kappa. That's the kappa. That's one explanation. So kappa would mean a poisonous component that could exist in the maror, in the lettuce. How do they touch chasa, lettuce, right? Chas is lettuce, in the lettuce, and the charois is the sweetness neutralizes it. He says eres. What do they say? Kappa, poisonous, right?
Kappa, they don't fix it, but they say poisonous element in the sap of the lettuce.
Poisonous element in the sap of the lettuce. That's the lashon of Rashi. Eres shebechazeres sha'asadav shebechazeres yesh by eres. The word eres means poison, some poisonous component. It could be, doesn't mean there is. Apparently, there were types of maror that there was a concern. He's not saying that every piece of lettuce has poison. There was a concern, perhaps, that there could be poison in there, and that would be neutralized by the charosis. That's what it seems. No, that's the first. Rashi doesn't say worms, he says poison. There's another interpretation, and that's the interpretation of Rabbeinu Chananel that's quoted also in the Rashbam and in Tosfos. If you look at the Rashbam, he says, Eres, chazeres yesh by eres k'derech haptzalim, v'hilchach tzarech netilas yadayim l'tibul rishon k'delakaman, sh'arei negeya b'mashkin k'shemashakeyas achazeres b'chareses. How does this come into this Gemara? That's why before you dip the lettuce into charosis, if you're doing it in the beginning of the Seder also, you'll have to wash your hands because the charosis has liquid in it. They would pour in wine or vinegar into the charosis, so it has liquid. So you're dipping your lettuce into a liquid. So you have to wash your hands before you do the first dip because you're touching a liquid. Rabbeinu Chananel Pirush, kappa toilas. Kappa is basically a certain worm that may sometimes be found in some of these vegetables of maror. Okay. So the charosis is made out of whether, the different, the nuts.
Dates.
Yeah. Right, but we pour in wine into the charosis, so that's the liquid that we're talking about. Okay.
It still doesn't come out. It becomes like a paste.
Right, it's more of a paste, right. So Rabbeinu Chananel says, yeah, but when you prepare the charosis, you add a liquid, whether it's vinegar or wine, to make it softer, and this is zecher l'dam, as a commemoration for the blood of the Jewish people, yeah. So therefore it's called a mashka. When it comes to the halacha of dipping in mashka, in liquid, it's called a mashka, it's called a beverage. So according to Rabbeinu Chananel, we're dealing with a particular type of worm, and according to Rashi, we're dealing with possible poison. According to Rashi, the charosis neutralizes the poison. According to Rabbeinu Chananel, the charosis kills the worm, and as a result of that, it will not damage the person. Okay, so there is a famous argument between the Tanaim and the Amirayim when the Torah tells us not to eat a sheretz. Sheretz ha-shoyret ala aretz, which is basically a creeping, crawling insect on the ground. Does it include this worm that we're talking about here, called the kappa, in the lettuce, because it grows inside of the lettuce or the other vegetable and never left it to go creeping and crawling on the earth? So is it part of the sheretz, ha-shoyretz al ha'aretz? If you say that the worm is included in this issur of sheretz, which is the halacha in Yeridea, that this worm is included in sheretz, aretz, and vegetable. So what does charosis help? You put it into charosis, what does it help? On the contrary, you're saying that it kills the worm, right? And there's no difference in shratzim between a living one and a dead one. It's not like a living one you're not allowed to eat, and a dead one you're allowed to eat. So Tosfos says that we're not worried about this worm because it's completely infrequent, it's completely uncommon. It's not something that a halacha is concerned about, this worm, because it's not something that you would call in any case, in any way, a common thing. In the majority of cases, they will not have this worm. So therefore, mitzad achila, we're not afraid. We're afraid of something else, and that's sakana. We have a klal, chamira sakanta meisura. Danger is much more stringent in halacha than a prohibition. In terms of prohibition, if it's a minority of minorities, we're not concerned. In terms of danger, we're always concerned. Even if it's just a fraction of a percent chance that you may have a danger. So therefore, by sakana, we don't rely on a roiv, we don't rely on majority. That's why we dip the chazeres into the charoises, so that if even there was this type of worm, it's going to die, and then you could rely on the roiv and on the chazaka that there's no worm and you can eat it. If you'll take a look in Tosfos, you'll see. Yeah, it's Eina Miskaven, it's Psikresha. You have to know if it's a gather of neshama, what type of insects, if they're mutter to. I mean, there's a lot of. So Tosfos says that in most vegetables they didn't have this kappa, and Shmuel relied on most of them, but because of sakana, you have to be afraid of the minority, even if it's a tiny, tiny fraction, and you need the charoisis to neutralize that danger. Right, yeah. We'll address it. So Rav Papa is learning from Rav Oshia that the danger of the kappa is only neutralized if you dip the whole chazeres into the charoisis. You have to dip the whole thing into the charoisis. So what's the sequence here? The sequence here is Rav Oshia said you have to dip, you have to wash your hands before you dip. Rav Papa understood that he was talking about the seder, that before you do karpas, you got to wash your hands. Why? Because you're taking your karpas and dipping it into a liquid. We know that karpas, you can also use lettuce. Like the Mishnah said, sometimes if you don't have anything else, you use lettuce. So from here, Rav Papa told us that from here we learn that what? That you have to, this chasa, you have to dip completely into the charoisis mishum kappa. If you think that you don't have to submerge it completely in charoisis. In other words, if the kappa will be neutralized simply from the effect, from the aroma of the charoisis, even if the whole mara doesn't go into it. Then, netilas yadayim lamali, what do you have to wash your hands? Alay naga. Your hands didn't touch the liquid. If you tell me you have to take the whole lettuce and get it fully in, so there's no way that your hand is not coming in contact with the liquid. But if you say you could just dip the edge of it, so what's the problem? You're holding on to the lettuce. The bottom of the lettuce touches the charoisis, and that suffices because the aroma of the charoisis will neutralize the poison or the worm, however you want to learn it. And then you take it back and you eat it. So what's the problem? Why would Rabbi Oshia say you have to wash your hands? So Rav Papa is proving for me, since Rabbi Oshia said that by the first dip, you got to wash your hands, and the first dip could be chazeres. So this means that it's a certain type of dip. When you're dipping it into charoisis, you're dipping it fully into charoisis, and therefore your hand is touching the liquid. So the liquid is becoming tameh. So the liquid is being metame what? The lettuce. And therefore you have to wash your hands. Or whatever, however you want to explain it, but the bottom line is you're touching the liquid. That's what Rav Papa is proving, how you got to dip your mother into charoisis. That's what Rav Papa is telling us. Because if not, you didn't touch the mashka. Says the Gemara, no, I disagree. The dilma maybe no, maybe you don't have to submerge it completely. The kappa meirecha mayas. What's the point? You put part of the lettuce in. What if the worm is on the top? What if the poison is on the top? How do you know where the poison is? It says kappa meirecha mayas. The kappa dies from the reach. In other words, the tardiness or the sharpness of the charoisis. The flavor of the charoisis, the smell, reich is the smell. The aroma of the charoisis already kills and neutralizes the kappa, the poisonous component of the worm, even if it doesn't actually touch the charoisis. Ad kedei kach, Rabbi Chananel would say that the worm dies from the reich, from the aroma of the charoisis, perhaps. So then why do you have to wash your hands? The answer is dilma meshakilei. Pashat, we're afraid he may touch the liquid. It doesn't mean that we know for sure you're going to touch the liquid. But since you're dipping it in, you may go 1 inch slower, right? And then your fingers will touch the liquid. So because of that, they made netilas yadayim. And this is halachically very relevant a whole year. When I take, if I'm at a smorgasbord and I take broccoli or carrots or parsley, right? Or whatever, kale, spinach, any vegetable, and I'm dipping it into a liquid, let's say the salt water, right? I'm dipping it into a liquid. We're talking about a liquid. And what happens? I'm not planning to touch the liquid. I'm just touching the top of the carrot. So what's the big deal? Do you need Natilas Yadayim? From here we learn you would need Natilas Yadayim. Why? Because if it's something that usually you eat with your hands, it's not something you always eat with a spoon. You eat with your hands, and there's a chashash you may come to touch it, so they already made Natilas Yadayim in that situation. That's what the Gemara is telling us. It becomes a very relevant halacha. If it's something you don't eat with your hands, for example, drinking wine or coffee, then even if I put my finger in the coffee, I don't have to wash my hands. Even if right now I want to taste the coffee with my finger, I don't have to wash my hands. Now, why? Because it's not the derech, it's not a common thing. I don't dip my finger in the coffee. Even if you want to, that's fine. If it's something you eat with a spoon always or a fork, even if you touch it, you don't have to wash your hands because it's not the derech. But if it's something that the derech is to eat with your hands and therefore it's common that you're going to touch the liquid, or at least it's pretty frequent, then you have to wash your hands. So there's no proof that the whole morer got to go into the charoisis because that's how the kappa gets neutralized. Maybe the kappa gets neutralized even if there's somewhat of a distance from the smell. You still have to wash your hands because you may come to touch the liquid. So there's no proof to Rav Papa's halacha.
What is the definition of liquid here? For example, today, somebody dips into hummus.
Excellent. So most poskim say that the liquids we're talking about is the shivas hamashkim. The liquids we're talking about are the 7 beverages that the Torah defines as liquid. When you have hummus that's made from chickpeas, or tchina, sesame seeds, that's not the mashkim we're talking about. When I put my carrot into tchina or into hummus, that's not mashka. Here we're talking about wine. The Charesis has wine in it. Wine is one of the 7 mashkim, or vinegar comes from wine. The 7 mashkim are, right? Yad, shachat, dam. Yad, the 7 mashkim, Yad, shachat, dam. As long as the liquid is there. Wine, bee honey, olive oil, milk, dew, blood, and water. If the mashkin is bottled, if the mashkin is absorbed in the food, then we're not talking about that. The way they would do the charosis is they would pour the wine after. There was a liquid of wine there, actually they wouldn't make it l'chatchila with wine. They'd make the charosis and then pour in a little wine. So it was just a liquid. It was not, That's a different type of charosis. Your charosis, the wine is absorbed. But the way they used to make charosis is you make a charosis, you had your paste, and then you poured in a little wine. Mamash pouring wine afterwards. So then it's pashat wine. So when you're dipping it in charosis, you're dipping it into a liquid, also a food and a liquid together. So therefore you need natilas yadayim. Of course, when we're doing natilas yadayim, it's for karpas and salt water. So then for sure you need natilas yadayim. Because by our second dip, we already washed our hands a second time for rachza, for matzah anyway. So we're good. We're good, right? No, touching liquid is not a problem. If I go to a river and I take water with my hands and I drink it, I don't need natilas yadayim. That's not the derech. In other words, when you wash when you don't have to wash, that's not fruits that are wet. If you take grapes and you dip them in water and now there's a liquid flowing on the grapes, then you have to wash. I told you already that the Shulchan Aruch Harav brings in Siman Kuf Nun Ches that the world is not nizer in this whole thing. And he says you should be, but don't protest it because there is a strong shit in the Rishonim, like we learned from Tosfos, that you really don't have to do it anymore because the whole point was not to get tameh, but we're anyway tameh. So it's just another perspective. L'poyel, the halach is you should wash your hands and not make a bracha. You should wash your hands and not make a bracha. I see people often by smorgasbords, they don't always know this halacha sometimes, They'll have they'll dip something in a liquid, but they don't know. So if it's taka something you only eat with toothpicks, or you only eat with a spoon, or you only eat with a fork, then it's fine. It's like a drink. I don't have to wash my hands before I drink coffee. I might come to touch it, but that's fine because it's not a common thing. So if it's something you always eat with a fork, you're good. If it's the common thing. But when it's things that we dip with our hands, over there's a halacha, you have to wash your hands before. Davar shetibule b'mashka. You see, it's what's fascinating is there's no halacha, I told you many times, that can't be always traced back to its origin, right? Like everything is traced, like we know how it began, who said it, when he said it, under what circumstances it was said, the different ways of interpreting it. Like every machloikas, like this is a big machloikas. Do you have to wash your hands or not today? Do you have to make a bracha or not? If you believe that you still have to wash your hands before tibuli mashkel, just like you have to wash your hands before bread, you have to make a bracha. It's a mitzvah medivrei sofrim. Before you touch liquid, you gotta wash your hands, make a bracha. If it's because of tumah, you don't have to wash your hands, right? Today. And even when you did have to, you don't have to make a bracha. Because karpas were nizar. The answer is because karpas, everybody conforms to the seder. That's the reason.
Just to have it.
No, because everyone is following a seder. Because that's the halacha. The halacha is you have to wash your hands without a bracha. That's exactly the point. Karpas teaches you what the halacha is, and by Pesach.
All year you're gonna do it.
Okay.
When you're eating grapes.
All year we don't do it for different reasons.
Because we don't know. Because we're not for. Okay. Now, just interestingly, according to Rav Papa, if you would use for karpas not morer, you would use for karpas potato or onions, you wouldn't have to wash your hands before karpas. Because according to Rav Papa, the whole reason why you have to wash by morer is because you're dipping it fully into the charaisis because of the kappa. But if it's a regular vegetable where there's no issue of kappa, poison or worms, and therefore you don't have to dip it in fully, according to Rav Papa, you wouldn't have to wash your hands. But according to the refutation of Rav Papa, even by a regular karpas like us, you have to wash your hands. Why? Even though I'm not taking my potato and putting it fully into the water, I may just dip the tip of the potato or the tip of the onion. Who cares? Because I could put it into the water, and it's very likely I may go down a little lower. Therefore, you would wash your hands. So this argument, it becomes very relevant to halacha. Rav Papa is saying that from Reb Oshia you learn that when you dip the mud in the charaisis, you got to dip fully. Because if not, you wouldn't have to wash your hands. What do we learn from this yesod? That if you would dip something in a way that you don't have to dip it fully, you wouldn't have to wash your hands. So the Gemara rejects it. So practically, where's the relevance? In our karpas, it becomes relevant. According to Rav Papa, you wouldn't have to. And according to the rejection of the Gemara, you do have to. Because even if we're dipping only the edge of the vegetable, because I may go lower and dip it fully and touch the mashkin, therefore, I would have to wash my hands. Which is why in our Haggadah we say Kadesh, Urchatz. Rav Papa would never agree with the Urchatz, because if you're using Karpas, there's no Urchatz. If you're using Morer, there's Urchatz, but not Karpas. But we say Urchatz because we rejected Rav Papa's position. Zog the Gemara weiter. Amar Rav Papa, Amar Rav Papa, and Rav Papa also said, don't keep the morer submerged in the mikveh of the charaisis. Dilma agav chalye de tavlin, because perhaps from the sweetness of the charaisis mevatele lemeroire, it will obliterate the taste of the morer ubeinan ta morer. And to do the mitzvah, you need to taste the flavor of the morer veleka, and it's not here, and therefore you will not fulfill your obligation. Hence, Rav Papa says, make sure you don't leave it there, which is the reason that the poskim say that you shake the charaisis of the morer not to obliterate or alter the bitterness, the sharpness of the morer. This doesn't have to do with the concept of mitzvahs, mevatlois zu, because the charaisis that comes with the morer to kill the kappa is not called bittul of morer, because that's the way of eating it. That's the natural way of eating morer. You have to eat morer with charaisis. What we're saying here is that you have to make sure that you feel the taste of bitterness and not allow the sweetness to take over. Says the Gemara, Adbirei Reb Chizda l'Rabbanu Ukva v'Darash. Reb Chizda respected and gave a leadership position to Rabbanu Ukva and allowed him to give the drasha. Rabbanu Ukva was a grandson of the great sage known as Rav. He was the son of the Rosh Hagoyla, the leader of the Jewish exile in Babylonia, was the father of Rabbanu Ukva and a son of Rav. Rabbanu Ukva was a grandson of Rav. Rabbanu Ukva came one day to the region of Reb Chizda, so Reb Chizda gave him respect. How did he give him respect? he gave him the opportunity to give the drasha, to give the public lecture, to give the public shir instead of him. That's what it means. Adberei Reb Chizda Rabban Okva. Reb Chizda gave a leadership position to Rabban Okva, v'darash, and he gave a drasha. What did he say in this lecture? Not al yadav betibul rishon, not al yadav betibul sheni. Even if you washed your hands before the first dip in the Seder, you got to wash your hands a second time before the second dip in the Seder. One second. We'll get to that in a moment. Amarua Rabbanon Kameder of Papa. The students presented this halacha in front of Rav Papa. This that they heard from Rabbanu Ukva, who gave the shir instead of Reb Chizda. That's what they told him. And they said, Haba alme itmar. The rabbis added an explanation. They said this halacha was said as a general directive for the whole year. We're not talking about the Seder. Meaning, if in the beginning of a meal, a regular meal, I dip once, and then later I dip twice, I have to wash my hands a second time. Why? Because since after the first dip, I didn't think that I'm going to do a second dip, so I was not conscientious, I was not focusing on the cleanliness of my hands. So therefore, throughout the whole year, Ba'alma means it's a general directive for the whole year, that if you dip twice, at a meal, at a feast, at a dinner, at a reception, whatever it is, you got to wash again. The isal kedai techachitmar, because if you would think that it's about the case of the Seder, he's talking about the Seder, lamalina tilis yadayim trezimna. What do you have to wash your hands twice? Hamashal yadei chadazimna. You already washed your hands for the first dip, and you knew that there's going to be a second dip, because it's a Seder, it's an order, it's a structure. So therefore, you probably did not divert your mind from protecting your hands and preserving their cleanliness. So why would Rabban Ukva say you have to wash again? Amalu Rav Papa said absolutely not. Adirabba, Hache Itmar. He was talking precisely about the Seder. The Isal Kedaitech Baal Mitmar. If he was talking about general instructions, Lamali Tre Tibula. Why is he talking about two dips? Who does two dips during the year? Two special things that you dip. Who does this? The fact that he was talking about dipping a second time and washing your hands again, obviously he's talking about the time of the year when we're instructed to do two separate dips. Karpas in salt water and Marar in Charoises. So obviously he's talking about the time of the Seder. It's true that in the time of the Gemara, they would always dip, meaning we learned before that whenever they ate, their way of eating was through tibble. They would dip. That's true. But not before the meal. Before the meal, they wouldn't dip even once. They would start the meal, and then they would dip. Once you start the meal, you already washed your hands. So it's not an issue because you washed your hands for bread. The Chiddush of Marukva of Rabban Ukva is the dip before the meal. In other words, he was not talking about a person who dips twice in the middle of a meal because he already washed his hands for bread, and you're going to eat bread throughout the whole meal. So obviously you're protecting your hands during the meal. So of course you don't have to wash a second time for the second dip. Obviously he's talking about a person who dips twice outside of the meal, outside of a Monsey lechem in Aretz. When is there a concept that a person will dip twice outside of the realm of a meal, before a meal? That doesn't exist. So obviously when is he talking about? He's talking about Pesach, Karpas and Marar. Oh, frag the Gemara, really? Elamai hachitmar. So he's talking about the Seder, yeah? Natilis yadayim trezimna lamali amashla yada chadazimna. Then takawari you have to wash twice. You already washed once at the beginning of the Seder, and you know there's going to be a second dip. So how can Rav Papa justify this? Amri, they answered, Kivan de boya lemeimer hagadata v'halela. Since between the first dip and the second dip you have to say the whole Haggadah, plus Hallel, because you do Karpas, Yachatz, Magid, and only later are you going to do Marar. So therefore, Dilma Suche Ascheladaite. We're afraid that during saying the Haggadah and Hallel, you diverted your mind from your hands, and your hands may touch different parts of your flesh, covered parts of your flesh, or excrement, and therefore, by the second dip, you have to wash a second time. Okay, so in other words, we're afraid of this Hesach Hadas during the Haggadah, and that's why you have to do a second time. Now, here's an important thing. When we say a second time, he says Tibul Sheni, right? Noitel Yadav Tibul Sheni. So just take a look in Tosfos, Tzarich Sheyitel B'Tibul Sheni. Lav Dafkin Nakat B'Tibul Sheni. The Ha'avid Le Basar HaMoitzi, the Bayin Atilas Yadayim. You're not washing for Marar. You're already washing Rachza before Monsey. Ela Agav Tibul Rishon Nakat Tibul Sheni. V'Anetilanami Gam L'Tzarich Tibul Ba. What he means tibul sheni is you're washing from matzah and from maror. But the point is, even if we wouldn't be eating matzah, we would still have to wash our hands from maror. We don't have to wash from maror precisely, exclusively because we already washed from matzah. But the point is that the karpas washing does not go for moitzi, matzah, maror. Why do we have to wash our hands a second time? If you eat the maror before hamoitzi, you would still have to wash your hands a second time for the maror. The only difference is because we wash for hamoitzi, we make a bracha on the tilas yadayim. Because by bread, it's a mitzvah medivrei seifrim. And because we're doing the maror afterwards, already we don't have to wash our hands again, because once you're eating bread, you can eat bread the whole meal, and you can eat maror the whole meal. In charoz, that's not a problem. So when he says tibul sheni, Tosfos is just saying, don't think Rabbanu Ukva meant that you dip the maror before hamoitzi. He's calling it for the second dip, because when you wash your hands again, it's also for the second dip. It's also for the bread, but it's also for the second dip. Right? Very important ha'ara in Tosfos. So this is a very geschmack of word. Why Rabbanu Ukva felt you have to dip, we have to wash twice, which is why we do urchatz and we do rachza. Urchatz is for the karpas, and rachza is for the maror, and of course also for the hamoitzi, and for the maror in the charosis, which requires anu netilas yadayim. That's not an issue, because just like you're saying, is that the reason we don't speak from hamoitzi all the way till the end of kairach? Because just like by a regular meal, when I wash my hands for bread, and then I eat bread, I could speak a whole meal about whatever I want. I can have a meal for 6 hours, right? And I can eat bread 6 hours later. Because we're assuming that as long as I'm in a meal and I'm eating bread, I am conscientious of my hands. I'm not mesiach das from protecting my hands. So that itself is not an issue, because the maror is being eaten, right, as the beginning of the meal, which is going to go through Shulchan Aruch. For example, we're going to eat matzah later in the meal also, right? We're going to eat afikoimon, we're going to eat all that, and we're not going to wash our hands again, because it's all one extension. The reason we don't speak from al achilas matzah all the way till the end of Kairich is because really we need a second bracha. According to Hillel, we need a second bracha on the matzah of Kairich and on the matzah of maror. I'm sorry, on the matzah of kairich and on the maror of kairich, because that's when we're fulfilling the mitzvah of maror according to Hillel. So that's really when you should say alachilas maror, and the halacha may be like Hillel. So if I speak between my alachilas matzah and alachilas maror and my kairich, I basically spoke between the bracha and doing the mitzvah. It's like I make a bracha on tefillin, right? And then I start talking to you about my car, and then I put on the tefillin. You don't do that. You're not supposed to make a hefsek between the bracha and doing the mitzvah. And according to Hillel, you're doing the mitzvah by kairich. You're not doing the mitzvah by maror, because the mitzvah of maror is only in a sandwich. So you have to make alachilas matzah and alachilas maror at the sandwich, according to Hillel, because that's when you're doing the mitzvah of maror together with matzah. You have to eat maror together with matzah. So the alachilas matzah, you're yotzeh from the first matzah, right? But it's going also on this matzah. And the maror you really have to do now. So you're using the first bracha. So that's why, even though you're being mafsik to eat, because we have no choice, but at least you shouldn't be mafsik words. But by the way, if a person does speak, sometimes people have conversations in the middle of matzah, maror, kairich, right? They sit and they have conversations. So you don't make a second bracha by kairich, right? Even if you had a conversation by maror, because safek brachas lahakal, since you may have already done the mitzvah, so we don't make a second bracha. But lechatchila it says that you also shouldn't speak. And that's, by the way, also the reason why would there be a reason to recline by kairich? Usually by maror we don't recline. By maror we don't recline, right? By matzah we recline, not by maror. Why would we recline by kairich if the whole reason we're eating it is only because Hillel ate the maror together with the matzah? Because by Hillel's kairich he used to recline. Because he had Pesach, matzah, that was his main mitzvah. That's what he reclined. That would be the reason why we would recline by kairich, which is, according to most halachic authorities, the proper thing to do. People don't realize how intricate every detail of the Seder is. Nothing is done stam, because we're in the mood. There's like literally every inch, every nakuda has a whole context.
You have to bear in mind that you're partnering up any further washing.
Yeah, so when you make alachilas matzah and maror, you have to have in mind that it's also for the matzah of the kairich, right? And afikaiman, and also for the and for the maror of the kairich. For them.
Wash for matzah. You have to bear in mind that you're partnering up any dipping that you might do during.
Yeah.
And that would be the whole year too.
Yeah. And when we make ha'adama on the karpas, we have in mind the maror. When we make ha'adama on the karpas in the beginning of the seder, we have in mind the ha'adama of the maror, because we're not doing a second ha'adama. Shulchan Aruch Harav says that there are people who don't speak till they eat the afikoyman. So the alchilas matzah, he says, v'chumr yiserihi. So this is just a superfluous stringency. So there's no need for it. In other words, you were yoytze your mitzvah of achilas matzah, you're fine.
So
The first dip.
first and the second as well.
No, because this has to... No, the first dip doesn't go for the second dip. The first bracha the first washing only goes for the first dip. That's the point. That the second dip needs a new bracha.
The minute that we dip the egg in the salt water, we don't wash for it.
You're good, because once you washed your hands already from matzah and maror, now you continue eating bread, matzah, a whole meal, and you could dip as much as you want. Just like in the middle of the week. If I wash my hands for bread, I could dip as much as I want.
So you're saying
The second washing goes for everything. Yeah, because there's no hesed chadas. Yeah, if in the middle of the second wash, if after the second washing we would sit down to say the Haggadah, we would have a problem, but we don't. We just focus on eating, so we're good. The Chazal understood that when people are eating, they're focused on the cleanliness of their hands. Hygiene is a major part of eating. When I'm doing the Haggadah and you get into an argument with somebody about Pshat and the Haggadah and your hands go like this, right? And you don't know where they end up.
encourage us to eat with fork and knife.
Amar Rava, Rava said, Bala matzah yatza. If you swallowed matzah without chewing it, you just swallowed it. And remember also that their matzah was very different than our matzah. It's just good to remember. Our matzah is thin and hard. Their matzah, as they still have from Yemen, the Yemenite matzah, was very, very soft. It was like a soft lafa or soft pita. Very soft pita. Some of them were even much thicker. I'm just mentioning that to appreciate this. Bola matzah, if you swallow matzah without chewing it, yatza, you fulfilled the mitzvah. Why? Because the mitzvah is to eat, and swallowing is considered consumption. It's considered eating. And the pasuk says, Ba'erev toichlu matzahs, you should eat matzah. True. We learned before that if you eat maror with the matzah, you weren't yotze the mitzvah, because the maror obliterates and alters the taste. So l'cha'ira we see that you have to have the taste of matzah. But there's a very big difference, because over there, the matzah itself lost its taste. When you eat matzah together with maror, the maror altered the matzah. Here, the matzah we're Puritans. The matzah retained its integrity. It's just I swallowed it. But the matzah wasn't changed. When you eat maror together with matzah, the maror altered the very fabric, the chemistry, so to speak, the flavor of the matzah. That's not good. It's mavatalit, unless it's mitzvahs, ain't mavatal zu, but as we learned, maror is derabanan, matzah is deraisa. But here, the matzah has the tam of matzah. It wasn't played with, it wasn't killed, it wasn't altered. It's just you're not feeling it because you happen to swallow it. But the matzah is matzah. The matzah is matzah. You ate the hefts of the matzah is unchanged. You just went through you just skipped the process of chewing. It's a very interesting distinction.
How good do you taste it or not? Because it has no taste.
Oh, so you're asking a chayra, line of kamina. The bottom line is the guy tastes, he doesn't taste it, he swallows it. So who cares if there was maror there, right? He swallows it.
No, this maror is different. This maror that changes the taste.
Oh, yeah, so that's the vart. In other words, I don't care if you don't taste the matzah. You know, you get it straight down into the throat, granted. But what are you getting down? You have to have pure matzah. It has to be matzah. I have to eat matzah. Swallowing is called achila, but it's achilas matzah. If I cook the matzah, let's say, or I put the maror together with the matzah, so now it's not pure matzah anymore. That's the point. It's not pure matzah. If we want to use spiritual language, eating matzah is we learned matzah is moichen da abba, right? Matzah is michla da mehemnusa. It's not about my flavor. I don't have to experience matzah. On the contrary, matzah transcends experience. That's why you could swallow matzah. You don't have to taste matzah. Matzah is not about tam. Bina is about hana, tam, flavor, experience. Matzah is that which is deeper than experience. Emunah is beyond das. It's the concept of moichen da abba we learned in Likkutei Torah in the Maim about the Haggadah. So therefore, matzah you don't have to taste, but it has to be real matzah. If it's altered, then you have to have the real matzah. The real matzah got to go into you. That's the difference between what we learned before and what we're learning now. Bola matzah yatza, bola maror lo yatza. Why? because the Torah wanted you should experience the taste of the maror. Because the whole point of the maror is because they embitter their life. And that's why it's called maror. It's called maror because merirus. If there's no merirus to it, it's about the experience. Bala matzo maror. What if you swallowed them together? You swallowed matzah and you swallowed maror. Yidei matzah yatza. You fulfilled the mitzvah of matzah because the maror didn't affect the matzah because you swallowed it. Because you swallowed it, you overpassed the ability for maror to alter it. So you're yotza the matzah. But yidei maror lo yatza. But you weren't yotza maror.
You feel the maror.
Huh?
You still feel the maror.
In other words, you would think that here there's two negatives. There's two reasons why you shouldn't be yotze. First of all, you didn't taste the matzah because you didn't chew it. And second of all, the matzah perhaps didn't even touch your throat because maybe the maror was like a chatzitza because you ate it together with maror. So there's two reasons why you may have suggested that this didn't work. So Rav is mechadish that you still fulfill the mitzvah. That's why Rav has to repeat this, even though Rav has said before that you don't have to taste matzah. But here there's an extra reason that Rashbam explains why to delegitimize him. Why? Because it's not only he didn't taste the matzah. It may be that even the matzah didn't come in direct contact with your insides because there was maror around it. Let's say you put the matzah inside of the maror, right? So the matzah didn't even hit the spot. It didn't hit the spot. There's a chatzitza. Still you're yotze. Why? Because the matzah's inside. I don't care if the matzah is protected by it went into the body. Emunah went into your body. Truth went into your body is good.
It's like an injection.
It's like an injection. Yeah, like an injection. Yeah. But maror, you didn't yotze because you didn't chew it. You didn't chew it. Maror, you can't swallow. So it's an interesting thing. You eat them. You take a piece of matzah, kazayis matzah. You hack it out in maror. You cover it up with the maror. You swallow it all. The matzah you were yotze. The maror you weren't yotze. Interesting. If you would chew them, you wouldn't be yotze matzah because the maror would be mevatel the tam hamatzah. This is a mile of swallowing. If you would chew the matzah and the maror together, you would put it in the letters, like you would do kairich. You wouldn't be yotze matzah. Because the maror manipulates and dilutes and alters the taste of the matzah. But because you overpassed, you passed over, I should say, pass over. You passed over, you leaped over the tasting experience. You went straight to the nekuda, to the having it. So then you gain something. You're yotze the mitzvah, even though there's maror there, because you didn't allow the maror to manipulate the matzah. It's a very deep idea. You didn't go through tam, so therefore it can't affect it. The maror can't affect it, can't manipulate it.
Somebody who has emunah, people cannot manipulate.
Yeah. Tam could be manipulated. When the matzah is on a level of tam, you could manipulate it. When the matzah is on a level of bliya beyond tam, it's not manipulated. Now, as the Rashbam says, this is only b'di'evet. In other words, the chatchila, the mitzvah is to chew up the matzah and feel the taste. But the Yevid, if you didn't, because the kavana, as we said, is that Moichen Abba should come into Moichen Dima, that the tam itself should be one of matzah. But this is the maila that you see when you swallow matzah that the maror can't get to it. It's a fascinating halacha.
Why by the man? It says that it could have basically assumed any taste you want.
Yeah. I guess, like even we see by matzah, that ultimately, I guess the point is to internalize, to make it part of the human experience, not just... It should come into a pnimius, into the person.
Pass the taste, it should go through the taste.
Right, yeah. Not pass over, but go through, yeah. You're right, that's the point. Emunah is not inferior to tam, but it's above tam. It should never be lower than tam, it should be higher than tam. Till where you can. You use bina till where you can, but ultimately, leis machshava tfisa beh. No machshava, even the highest, can grasp him. That's where emunah comes in. That's matzah. That's the child's experience of father. It's like the child knows this is his father. How does he know? Not through mathematics or equations. It's like I see it, I know it, I feel it. I know who my father is, even though I have no DNA testing.
Maybe by man is also the same way, because it's actually our thought that dictates us.
Perhaps.
It's not the taste buds. It's not the experience, but our thoughts.
You're right, because the man itself lends itself to every taste. If it lends itself to every taste, that means that it really transcends every taste. And the way you define it, that's what it becomes. Like with quantum mechanics. Your observation of it, you see steak, it's steak. You see kishka, it's kishka. You see spinach, it's spinach. You see cucumbers, it's cucumbers. You see lollipops, it's lollipops.
So the certainty is actually
It's much deeper, yeah. It's much deeper, yeah. But matzah is something it's not chum. Chum, by definition, has a strong tam. Matzah is considered a bland food, right? It's defined as ein bat tam. It doesn't have a special flavor, which is why people usually don't eat it as a regular, rich, flavorous food. There's an expression in Tanya, emunah tahira, pure emunah. So there was a chassid who said, what's pshat emunah tahira? What's pshat pure emunah? So he said, pure emunah means emunah that's not fapachket with seichel anushi. It's not soiled. It's not soiled through human intellect. It's pure. It's pure. That's pure matzah. It's not soiled. It's emunah. It's not soiled through seichel anushi. But then, what tasting matzah would mean, that you allow the emunah to come through a person's mind, so that the mind becomes a conduit rather than an obstruction. That's the point. Emunah is deeper than intellect. But the intellect could be a contradiction to the emunah, and the intellect could just be a conduit that allows the emunah to flow through it without it obstructing it. Karachan b'siv. A sieve is an interesting thing. Sieve is called it grows around a palm tree. What is it called? What does he say, sieve? A bast. Okay, so basically you wrap it up in a type of grass, in a type of bast that's not kosher for maror. That's the point. What happens? Ublon, and you swallow them. Af yedei matzah nami lo yatsa. Now you weren't yotza matzah either. Why? Because since the bast or this grass wraps them up completely, so that means they didn't enter into his mouth, not the matzah and not the maror. So even though you swallow them and they went into your stomach, it's not called achila. It's not called achila. In the previous case, when you swallowed matzah and maror together, even though the matzah is wrapped around and encompassed by the maror, since the maror is also food, the maror is also edible, it's lettuce, so it's not called a chatzitza between the matzah and the throat, because that's the way of eating, right? You'll sometimes put something in a piece of lettuce, that's the way of eating it. So therefore, it would be yotze, just like if you would put matzah with any other food, not only maror, and swallow it. Yeah, let's say you put matzah into an egg. Just to give you an example. Let's say you take an egg, the membrane of an egg, you put matzah and you swallow it. You would still be yotze. But here, when you have sieve, which is not edible, so then it's not a food. So now it's called a chatzitza, a partition between the matzah and the maror and your throat, and that's not the derech achila. It's not the way of eating. You don't eat something wrapped into something that's not edible. It's just not how you eat, right? You don't take a nut and keep it in the walnut shell and eat it with the shell. You're not supposed to do it. Could you do it? You could do it, but it's not the derech achila, so therefore you're not yotze. You're not yotze. The expression of Rashi here is it's not called. It's not considered. It's not considered being in your mouth. Or the Rashbam says, "Kizoyrik even lechemes." It's like you threw a stone into a sack. You threw a stone into a sack. 15 lines from the bottom. Kufta Svavam at Beis. We learned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, "Heviu lefanov matzah v'chazeres." They brought before the person running the Seder, matzah and maror. So the Gemara says, Amar Reb Shimi bar Ashi, Reb Shimi the son of Ashi said, matzah lifnei kol echad ve'echad, maror lifnei kol echad ve'echad, v'charoises lifnei kol echad ve'echad. You have to bring matzah before every person sitting at the Seder, maror before every person, and charoises before every person. Remember that during the time of the Gemara, the way they used to have meals is, every person had their own little bed or couch, and every person had their own little table right in front of their couch, and that's how they used to eat. So Reb Shimi holds that since the tables are separate, so every table needs to have its own matzah, its own maror, and its own charoises. You can't only have it on the table of the person who's running the Seder. Which is why the Rashbam says that today, when we all sit by one table, Reb Shimi would agree that you could bring these foods only in front of the person who is the Baal Habayis, the master of the Seder, and he will distribute a portion of matzah and maror and charoises to every single person. Yeah, that's what the Rashbam tells us, that today this halacha wouldn't apply because when everyone had their own table, they needed their own matzah, their own maror, their own charoises for the whole Seder. But now it's one table, so he will distribute it to everybody else. So from the Rashbam, it seems that the reason is because you have to say the Haggadah with the matzah and the maror in front of you and the charoises in front of you, and therefore, if I have my own table, I need it in front of me during the Seder. So each one had basically their own kaida. According to Reb Shimi, it was an obligation that everybody has to have mamash their own kaida, because everyone has to say the Haggadah over their own matzah and their own maror. Since, even if they're not saying the Haggadah, since he's saying the Haggadah, the Balabayis is saying the Haggadah, and they're listening to the Haggadah, which is also what used to happen, Shemea Ka'ina, they would listen to one person saying the Haggadah, and it's like you saying it yourself. So even though he's saying the Haggadah, but they are Yoitze with his Haggadah, so they need their own Matzah and Maror, because it's like they themselves are saying the Haggadah. So that's why Reb Shimi holds that everyone had to have their own Matzah, Maror, and Chazeres. This is the view of the Rashbam, how he explains Reb Shimi. I should just say that Tosfos disagrees, and Tosfos says that the reason is because other times of the year, the owner, the Balabayas, says Hamaitzi, and he gives the bread to everybody. But Tosfos says the night of the Seder, it's better that everyone has their own food in front of them, so they don't have to wait between the bracha until they get their piece of matzah. It could take some time, and there's going to be a long hefsek between the bracha that he says and them eating. And since in this case the bracha is part of the mitzvah, because it's a special bracha ala chilas matzah, so therefore it's much better if everybody has the food on the table so they can eat it much faster. So that's why Reb Shimi says that everyone has to have their own, which according to Tosfos, this would apply also when there's one table, because it's not about the tables, it's about having the ability to eat right after you make the bracha ala chilas matzah or ala chilas maror. Reb Huna argues. I'm sorry. And Reb Shimi continues. And you don't take away the table only from the person who's saying the Haggadah. What this means is, we know that the minhag was that one person used to say the Haggadah and everybody would listen to him, and that's how they fulfilled the mitzvah of telling the story of the Exodus, because Shemea Ka'ina, when you hear it, it's like you're saying it. We know that there was a minhag in the beginning of the Seder to take away the table with all the food on it, and they had little tables, in order to arouse the curiosity of the children. They should start asking, why are you taking away the table? So Reb Shimi says, even though everyone needs their own matzah, maror, charoises, not everybody has to do this minhag of moving away the table. You could just take away the one table from the Baal Habayis. That's what he says. The akiras hashulchan, the taking away the table, only from the person who's saying the Haggadah. Rashi, by the way, holds that akiras hashulchan doesn't necessarily mean you move away the table. It means picking up the kaira. You pick up the kaira from on top of the table. That's what Rashi says. Oikrinas hashulchan doesn't mean you have to take away the table. It means you pick up the kaira, which is a different interpretation. But the Rashbam says that's not enough. Akiras hashulchan means you move away the table. But today's day, you can't do that. We have a big table. You have 20 people around the table where you take the table to the kitchen. So he says, today's day, when we all have one table, it's going to be too hard to move away the whole table. It could take a very long time, and it's a big tercha. So he says, what you do is you take the kaira and you move it to the edge of the table, and that's called akiras shulchan. You're not taking away the table, but you're moving the food to the other side of the table. That's how the Rashbam explains what we do today. He says you take the kaira with the matzah and the maror and the shnei tafshilin, the zroya and the beit, you put it at the end of the table, v'dai lano b'kach. So this is the view of Reb Shimi. Everyone needs their own matzah, maror, charoises, but not everybody has to remove the table or the kaira. Reb Huna omer kula nami lifnei misha omer haggadah. I disagree. The matzah, the maror, the charoises, everything could be only in front of the person who says the Haggadah. Just like you don't have to take away the table only from the person who's saying the Haggadah. You don't have to prepare the food only in front of the person who is saying the Haggadah. Reb Huna agrees that it's fine if he himself has the matzah, maror, charoises in front of him. That is inclusive for everyone enjoying and celebrating the Yom Tov with him and being Yotze the mitzvah. It's enough, and we don't have to have everyone having their own kaira. The halacha is like Reb Huna. He can have the food and then in the right time distribute matzah, maror, etc. to all the people around the table. Says the Gemara, Lama Eikronas HaShulchan. What's this idea of taking away the table before saying the Haggadah that we're discussing? Amri debei Rabbi Yanai, the people in the Yeshua Rabbi Yanai said, Kadesh Yakiru Tinoikus. The children should recognize what is going on, because whenever there's change, it arouses and triggers the inquisitive curiosity of children. Yakiru Atinoikus, you want to make them alert. So you don't just go through the routine, you do things different. V'yishalu, and then they'll ask a question. They'll ask, why are you taking away the table before we eat? Imagine you have a little table in front of you the way it used to be, and they take away the table. We just washed for karpas, we just dipped something, why are you taking away the table? And that will allow us to respond and tell them the story, because as we know that the right way of fulfilling the mitzvah of telling the story is by responding to questions. The pasuk says, Ki yisholcha vincha machar lemer. When your child will ask you, v'amarta levincha, you should tell him avodim hayinu. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu tells us in Parshas Vaschana. So from here we learn that the mitzvah is, it should be with shaila and shuva. When your child asks you, you should tell him. We want the child to ask, which is why we do all of these unique things and changes on this night in order to create an environment and an ambiance of questions, of curiosity, of inquisitiveness, of wonder. So that's the first thing we do. We will remove the table. The Gemara tells a story. Abaya have a Yosef kamei de Rabba. Abaya, when he was a child, was sitting in front of Rabba. It was the night of the Seder. We have to remember who Abaya was. Abaya was an orphan. His father passed away before he was born. His mother died shortly after he was born. And therefore Abaya was raised by his uncle. His uncle's name was Rabbi. Rabbi was Abaya's uncle and his teacher. He taught him Torah and he raised him as a father, because Abaya didn't have his own parents. That's why it says Abaya was sitting by Rabbi. It was a Seder of Pesach, and Abaya was sitting in front of Rabbi. Chaza, Abaya saw the kamadli taka mikamei, that they picked up the table from Rabbi. It was the beginning of the Seder. Abaya was a little kid, he was a baby, and he sees that they pick up the table, they kamadli taka, they pick up the table mikamei from Rabba to take it away. Omar Lahu, Abaya says to the people with a question, Adayin loika achlinon, we haven't eaten yet. Asu kami akri taka mikamon, and they're coming and taking away the table from us. We haven't eaten. Omar le Rabba. Rabba tells this little boy Abaya, Patarton miloymar manishtana. You have exempted us from saying the manishtana. We could right away begin avodim hayin. We're done. Abaya naturally burst out. He says, "What are you doing? We haven't eaten yet. Why taking away the table?" Rabbi tells him, Patarton, you exempted us from saying the manishtana. We can get straight into the meat and the potatoes of the Haggadah. We can get straight into the story. In other words, we know the Mishnah is going to tell us soon the order of questions manishtana. And we always need these questions and answers, because we don't tell the story without questions. But the moment, and if there's no children, the adults have to ask questions. And even if there's nobody there, you have to ask yourself the questions. So Rabbi said, once Abaya asked a question, we don't have to do any more the manishtana and ask these questions. He exempted us from the manishtana, and we can immediately start with avodah mayinu lepari b'mitzrayim and move on. So this is a very interesting story, which would seem to indicate that the question of Abaya substituted the need for manishtana. Even though he didn't ask one of the questions of the manishtana, he asked another question. He asked his own question: why taking away the table? But it seems like, and that's how the Rashbam explains the Gemara, that basically you don't need to do manishtana. They could skip straight to avodim hayinu. Right. So basically, according to this, the manishtana is only there for those who are not asking. To make sure there's a question. Like Chevra asked, which is a fascinating insight. Basically, Abaya had his own question. We're good. Next, Patarton, we can move on to the Seder. Because the purpose has been done. You're wondering, and now, let me tell you the story and you'll understand. You'll understand why we're doing all of these Why are we doing all of these strange things? So basically, we'll tell Abaye, don't worry, we're still going to bring back the table, we're going to eat, etc. I should just say that Tosfos argues, if you look in Tosfos, Kedei Sheyakir Hatinik V'Yishal, you see the last Tosfos. Kiloymar umitoich kach yovoi l'shol b'shar dvar. We move away the table, so he should ask this, and then he'll ask other things. But the question of taking away the table doesn't exempt us from the manishtana. In the story of Abaye, the Gemara only explicitly tells us about the first question of Abaye, not the last question. In other words, we're hoping that the first question, why you took away the table before the meal, and the father will say, don't worry, we're going to bring it back. We still have to dip the maror in charosis. So the child is going to say, why do we dip twice, taka, tonight? And that will generate all of the other questions and conversations. So Tosfos says that's what happened by Abaye. He didn't only ask about the first question with the table, he asked also the other questions. When Abaye finished and asked the manishtana, then Rabbi said, since you asked the questions, we don't have to ask the questions. That's what he meant. He meant patar ton. You exempted us from asking the manishtana. If you wouldn't have asked, right, we would have asked to ask the manishtana because you were already asking, so we don't have to ask. That's a completely different interpretation in the Gemara, where manishtana does have to be asked. But the Rashbam doesn't tell us that. The Rashbam says that you exempted us from completely asking the manishtana. Why? Because the moment you asked us manishtana, why you're taking away the table, we don't have to go through the regular manishtana. We just have to answer your question, and the answer is because avadim ayinu l'farei b'mitzrayim, and therefore it's a completely different night. We do today strange things because we want to teach and we want to explain to the children and we want to make changes, etc. Very interesting argument, huh?
Said numerous times.
You got to speak to the child inside of yourself. You got to levincha, your own inner child, right? Arouse the curiosity of the child inside yourself. Omar Shmuel said, lechem oini. The Torah calls matzahs lechem oini in Parshas Re'eh. It says, don't eat chametz. 7 days you should eat matzah. Lechem oini. What does lechem oini mean? Says Shmuel, lechem sha'oinin alav dvarim. It's a bread upon which you recite many things. The word oinin means, what does he say oinin? Recite? Bread on which you declare many things. In other words, the whole Haggadah and the Hallel is read with the matzah, in the presence of the matzah, when the matzah is in front of us. That's why we say by the Haggadah, matzah zu shanu oichlim al shoma. So the word oini comes from the word like v'anisa v'amarta in Parshas Kisavai. You should declare and say, you should respond and say. It's the matzah, it's the bread that comes with recitations, with declarations, with explanations. That's Shmuel. Tanya namihachi, we also have a brisa to support this. Lechem oini, lechem sha'oinin alav dvarim harbe. The bread upon which you declare many ideas. Davar acher, another explanation is lechem oini oniksiv. Even though it says oini, so Shmuel says it's like the word oine or oinim, like oinim amein, right? But it could be pronounced as oni. Remember in a Sefer Torah, there's no vowels, there's no nekudos. So you could pronounce it in different ways, and that's part of the plan. So when it says lechem oni, you can also read it as oni. It says oni without a vav. Doesn't say with a vav, then it could only be read as oini with a chaylam, but it just says oini without a vav, so you could pronounce it oini, which is the correct pronunciation. But you can also pronounce it as oni. What does this mean? It's lechem oni. It's the bread of the poor man. Me oni darka shedarka beprusa, just like a poor man is happy, is content with a broken piece of bread, not with an entire whole loaf of bread. So that's the point, is that this is bread of ani, that the matzah should be eaten the way a poor man eats his bread. When a poor man begs and gets bread, he usually doesn't get an entire loaf of bread. He gets a prusa. A prusa is a fragmented, what do they say prusa? A broken piece? Just the translation, huh? A broken loaf of bread. That's how you give the ani bread. We have a famous pasuk in Yeshaya, the Haftarah of Yom Kippur. Haloi parois la ra'ev lachmecha. Right? Break off and give the hungry person part of your bread. You give the hungry person a part of the bread. So darkei beprusa, his derech is to eat a broken piece of bread. Afkan beprusa. The chiddush is that tonight, what type of matzah should you eat? You should eat a broken piece of matzah. As Rashi tells us, Afkan beprusa, levorech al achilas matzah. The bracha of achilas matzah comes on a broken piece of matzah. And this is the entire source of why we break our matzah, we call yachatz, and when we make the bracha al achilas matzah, we're eating our matzah, we eat also from this broken piece of matzah, because this is lechem ani, it has to be the bread of a poor man. If it's a whole matzah, it's not lechem ani. Lechem ani you can only fulfill if it's a prusa, if it's a broken piece of matzah, because that's what the poor man eats. That's the second pshat of lechem oini, not oini as anisa from the word oinim, but from the word ani, the brach of a poor man.
To symbolize that we were poor before the Gula? To symbolize that the Jews were in a low state before the Gula? Because that night they got a lot of wealth from the Mitzrayim, and they were going out. They were really rich.
I guess it represents the transformation from poverty to wealth on one level, yeah. And also matzah, represents the idea of bittul, of humility. There's a certain poverty, an openness to great wealth.
Eating it but savor at the same time.
Right. In other words, there's a certain humility that comes hand in hand with wealth. Real humility constitutes real wealth, and great wealth brings to real humility. True greatness is humility, because in the presence of an infinity, humility is the only response, right? Now here's an interesting idea. Do you need lechem mishnah? Do you need 2 whole matzahs on Pesach as well? So this is a big argument between in the times of the Gaonim and the Rishonim. There was the view of the Rif and the Rambam who said that this replaces the lechem mishnah. Usually Shabbos and Yom Tov, you need 2 whole loaves of bread. So you would need 2 whole matzahs. But since the Gemara says lechem ani, so Pesach, the way we do lechem mishnah is 1 whole matzah and 1 broken matzah. This is the opinion of the Rif and the Rambam and other poskim, that you need 1.5 matzahs basically, or 1 and a piece of matzah. One opinion. But many other Rishonim disagree, and they hold that the lechem mishnah of Pesach is what? Is you still need 2 whole matzahs, just like every Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's not different. Just because on Pesach we add lechem ani, it's an addition, it's not a subtraction. It's there to add a 3rd matzah, not to take away from the whole 2 matzahs. In other words, Pesach is like any other Yom Tov. You need 2 whole matzahs. In addition to the 2 whole matzahs, you also need a component of aniyus, a component of poverty. It's a very interesting machlokes. According to the first opinion, the lechem ani replaces the lechem mishnah. It replaces the lechem shlema. The lechem shalom replaces the whole. You have 1 whole and 1 broken. According to the second opinion, no, you need 2 whole matzahs like every Yom Tov, like every Shabbos. You're not supposed to have a broken challah, you're supposed to have a whole challah. In addition, you also have a broken one, which is why we use 3 matzahs, right? And we put the top whole one, the top of the whole one, and then the yachatz we do for the middle matzah, and we break it, and then we do the bottom matzah. And that's why when we make hamoitzi lechem in haaretz, right? What do? We hold on to the 3 matzahs, so that way you have all the opinions. You made hamoitzi on 2 whole matzahs, plus you made hamoitzi on the broken matzah. You made hamoitzi on everything. Then for alachilas matzah, which is a unique bracha for Pesach, right? That we do on the top 2 matzahs. We do it on the top one and on the bottom one, because within the second opinion itself, there's 2 opinions. Most of the Rishonim, the Rosh, and most of the poskim hold that hamoitzi goes on the top matzah, the whole one, and alachilas matzah goes on the middle one, on the broken one. But there are other opinions, the Raven, who holds the opposite, that hamoitzi goes on the middle one and alachilas matzah goes on the top one. So for hamoitzi we do all 3 because we have all opinions, we do all 3. And then when you come to the second bracha, you're doing it on the top 2. So we make hamoitzi and alachilas matzah, right? Alachilas matzah, we hold the top matzah and the middle matzah. According to the first opinion, basically the hamoitzi is on the top matzah and the alachilas matzah is on the middle matzah, right? So you'll make now alachilas matzah, but you also want to include a second opinion. So that's why you don't only make alachilas matzah on the middle matzah, you'll also include the top one for alachilas matzah, because there is an opinion that hamoitzi is on the middle and alachilas matzah is on the top matzah. Yeah. Now, yeah. Even if you say alachilas matzah is for the broken matzah, right? And you still have to have lechem mishnah. Why by hamoitzi lechem in haaretz do we hold all three matzahs, even the middle one? Because ein ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. You're not supposed to overpass a mitzvah. And since you have now a mitzvah of matzah, right? So we don't just skip the middle matzah. So we hold all three matzahs. We make hamoitzi, then we make alachilas matzah, and then we break off a kazayis from the top matzah and from the middle matzah, and we eat two kazayis, and one from the top matzah, one from the middle matzah. That is the minig in most places. Yeah. The middle one is the ani, yeah. The broken one. The broken one, right. The broken one, yeah. The Gemara says, Davar Acher, another opinion. Ma darke shel ani hu masik ve'ishtay oife. Just like a poor man, he ignites the oven. What's it, masik? He heats up the oven and his wife bakes. Afkanami hu masik ve'ishtay oife. By Pesach also, he heats up the oven and his wife bakes. Meaning, a poor person is afraid he can't afford wood. So if he has wood and he puts it into the oven, he tells his wife, please prepare the dough, because if the fire goes out, we're not going to have more wood to be able to stoke the oven again. So we have to work very fast. We have to work together. I'll prepare the heat, you prepare the dough. Right when it's hot, we'll put in the dough and it'll bake. There's no time to waste, because if I heat up the oven and then I go bake and I knead and I'll do all that, by that time, the twigs that I had could burn out, and that's it, I have no fire. In other words, because of their poverty, they have to work together and work fast. So he says that's why it's called lechem ani, because matzah has to be done the same way by everybody. You heat up the oven and she has to bake, because if not, it could become chametz. There has to be this concept of swiftness. So that's what the Rashbam explains, that basically because of their poverty, they have to work together. He works on the oven, she works on the dough. The Ran says they work together because they're starving. That's the idea. But the bottom line is that they work together. So that's the concept here of he heats up the oven and she bakes it, shaloi tachmitz. We don't want to delay time, right? If he starts making the dough and then he heats the oven and it could rise, they just work together fast. That's the idea of ani. So it's a completely different interpretation. It's not the idea of ani that it has to be a broken piece. The idea of ani is that you have to bake it with teamwork, with swiftness, with alacrity. Do it together with your wife. In other words, make sure it's done with great alacrity and swiftness so that it doesn't become chametz. That's a completely different interpretation in lechem ani. Just like a poor man, he works together with his wife. They do it fast, either because they don't have enough wood or because they're hungry. That's how matzah should be done, even by wealthy people, because we're afraid it should be chametz. A completely different interpretation.
Break it anyway,
According to this, you don't have to break it. It's not about breaking. It's a whole matzah. Yeah, it's a completely different idea. I should say there's a third interpretation of Rav Haigon, a fascinating interpretation, completely different interpretation of the Gemara. It's quoted in the Rush, and he says that the Bryce is not talking about swiftness. It's not talking about that you have to prepare matzah with swiftness. The point is that they do it on their own. It's teamwork between a husband and a wife. Usually people who have more money, they go to the bakery and they buy bread from others. But because they can't afford, so they always do everything on their own, because the baker always has to charge extra, because he also has to make some money, right? He can't just charge. Every storekeeper, you have to charge a little extra because you buy the merchandise, and then you have to charge for your labor, and you also need a little money. And the poor people can't afford anything extra. They always do things on their own. So that's the idea. He does it together with his wife. In other words, they have to work together. They can't rely on other people because they don't have enough money. It's not about the swiftness. It's simply about doing it themselves. So Rabbi Haigon says what he means here is that the Torah calls matzah lechem ani to tell us that people should bake matzah on their own and not buy from other people. not rely on the hashgacha, the supervision of other people, but actually do it on their own. And based on this Rabbi Gon, there's a minhag by some Jews that they really like to go and bake matzah on their own and eat their own matzah rather than commercial matzah that they buy from other people, supervised by other people, made by other people. This is a very completely different interpretation of what it means. Not about the swiftness, but about doing it on your own and not relying on others. That's where you have to learn from poor people. So we have completely three different interpretations of ani. One is ani, that it has to be broken. The matzah itself has to be poor matzah, meaning broken piece of bread. Not how you make it. It's what you have right now. A second interpretation is about how you prepare it. It has to be like a poor person who works very, very fast because he doesn't have enough wood or because he's hungry. And the third interpretation of Rabbi Gon is it's not about what the matzah is right now, that it's broken, or how you make it fast or slow, but rather the fact that you make it on your own and you don't buy. Okay, Seder. Everybody have a wonderful Yom Tov, a kosher nafrelich and Pesach to you and your families, but to Klal Yisrael. Should be zoichet to eat the carbon Pesach this year with the real sandwich. Matzah, mor, and Pesach.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.